This is the watching darker things, stories that brings you deep down. The videos was the stirring events, first and out, true crime, conspiracy theory.
October 16th, 1991, a Wednesday, lunchtime in Killeen, Texas. If you'd walk into a LUBY'S cafeteria that day, you would have smelled fried chicken, roast beef, cornbread, yeast rolls, sweet tea, and tall red tumblers. Sweating on every table. You'd have seen office workers, foot soldiers, retirees, and families balancing cafeteria trays, making small talk in line. It was boss's day. The room was extra full. Nearly 150 people filled the restaurant. And in that crowd were parents, veterans, grandparents, and children. Ordinary Texans in an ordinary place. But just after 12:30 p.m., normal shattered. A blue Ford Ranger pickup smashed through the front window, spraying glass across the floor. At first, diners thought it was a freak accident. Then, the driver climbed out holding 2 pistols, and the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history at that time began. Hennard immediately began firing in quick cry, methodic, coldly. No words of warnings, just gunfire ripping across what only seconds before had been an ordinary lunch hour. The massacre claimed 23 lives at the time, the deadliest mass shooting in U.S. history. Dozens more were injured, and yet, when we talk about tragedies like this, there's a risk of reducing the dead to just numbers. But each person had a name, a face, a life story interrupting mid-sentence. Among the victims were teachers, soldiers, mothers, fathers, and retirees. A woman named Patricia Carter, age 57, was there celebrating Father's Day with callings. Another, Michael Griffith, only 48, was eating lunch with his mother. Both died, shielding others. And then there was Dr. Michael Griffith Sr., a retired Air Force pilot who had survived combat but was killed inside a cafeteria in his own hometown. Families were shattered across generations. In some cases, 3 members of the same family were killed together. But not everyone inside died. In the middle of this terror, some chose to act. Most famously, a man named Tommy Vaughn broke a large window with his bare hands, cutting himself badly in the process, but creating an escape route. Nearly a third of the surviving patrons got after the opening he made. His act of instinctive bravery saved countless lives. One survivor was Suzanna Hupp, who lost both her parents there. She had left her handgun locked in her car at the time. Texas law made it illegal to carry it inside. For the rest of her life, she has stayed to the decision that haunted her, and she went on to become one of the strongest voices for concealed carry legislation in America. These weren't nameless victims of a random act. They were ordinary Texans doing ordinary things until extraordinary evil walked through the front glass.
An automatic handgun in this case has killed a great many people. In Killeen, Texas today, between Fort Worth and San Antonio, during the lunch hour, a man drove his pickup truck through the window of a cafeteria, got out, and opened fire. The police in Texas say he killed 22 in the restaurant before killing himself. It is the worst mass shooting in the nation's history. Here's ABC's Morton Deed.
It was lunchtime in Killeen, Texas, but it looked like wartime. Helicopters, heavily armed police, the dead, the wounded, the frightened. A gunman had plowed his pickup truck through a cafeteria window. He jumped out of the truck, firing a 9mm semi-automatic pistol at people standing in the food lines. Eyewitnesses say the firing continued for 20 to 30 minutes. The shooting had stopped, but the panic and the fear and the pain continued as the authorities began their investigation to figure out why the gunman went on his rampage and what circumstances led to the massacre in Killeen, Texas. Morton Dean, ABC News.
The crime scene was stirring. Shattered glass everywhere. Food trays overturned and blood smeared across the buffet line. A blue pickup rested crooked among the tables like some grotesque piece of installation art. An everyday object turned white. Hennard had entered carrying a Glock 17 and a Ruger P8T9, both loaded with extended magazines. A witness said he moved deliberately, firing at close range, reloading calmly, almost like he was checking names off a list. In reality, he wasn't targeting specific individuals. His rage was broad, unfocused, but deadly. Forensics later showed he fired over 50 rounds in just a few minutes. Bullets tore through walls, furniture, and bodies. Survivors sat under tables, some playing dead, others whispering prayer. The floor was a mix of broken glass, food, and blood. And yet, for all the horror, investigators quickly realized something about the scene. It told them more about him than it did about his victims. This wasn't the act of someone who snapped in the moment. This was planned. He had chosen Luby's on purpose. He had armed himself for maximum destruction. He had written out his grievances long before this day.
Who was this man who turned an ordinary cafeteria into a slaughterhouse? George Hennard was born in Pennsylvania, but raised partly in Europe. The son of a doctor for a time, he lived in a mansion in Switzerland with his family, attending private schools. Wealth and privilege didn't make him stable. He was eventually discharged from the Navy after failing drug tests. He tried working various jobs in Texas, including as a merchant seaman, but never held on to them. He's what some call a ne'er-do-well. Former co-workers recalled him as angry, quick-tempered, prone to outbursts. One reported that Hennard often spoke of people he'd like to kill. Others said he ranted about women in particular, calling them snakes, betrayers, manipulators. He left a long, rambling note that essentially blamed women and society for all his problems. Now, the red flags were everywhere. He once told a store clerk to tell people to stop messing around outside my house or they'll pay. He told others he hated his neighbors. He hated immigrants, hated women. He quit jobs abruptly, cut ties with friends, and spent his time seething. The morning of October 16th, he made one last call to his mother. While on the phone, he happened to see Anita Hill testifying about sexual harassment during Clarence Thomas's Supreme Court hearings. He flew into a rage. Hours later, he was driving his truck straight into the front of Luby's.
Now, in many mass shootings, investigators piece together clues to see if there was a larger conspiracy, an accomplice, a wider plot. In Killeen, the evidence pointed to just one man, Hennard, had acted alone. Now, forensics tied the shell casings, the guns, the truck, and the victims together in one uninterrupted chain of carnage. There were no accomplices, no hidden masterminds. Just Hennard's long, slow descent into bitterness and hatred. But that clarity didn't bring comfort, because the dead ends weren't about who else might have been involved. They're about why no one stopped him sooner. Why his discharge from the Navy for drugs, his violent outbursts, his threats to coworkers, his neighbors' complaints, none of them triggered intervention. And the ultimate dead end? Hennard himself. As police stormed the cafeteria and surrounded him, he turned one of his guns upon himself and pulled the trigger. The man who had slaughtered 23 people denied justice the chance to answer back. Was this misogyny alone? Was it untreated mental illness? Was it ideological rage, or was it a toxic cocktail of all three? Some point to Hennard's manifesto, like writings about women, and see the massacre as a gender-driven hate crime. Others note his history of drug abuse, paranoia, and erratic behavior as signs of deeper psychiatric collapse. And some argue it was simply the expression of a profoundly selfish, bitter man who wanted to go out in a blaze of destruction. But perhaps the most chilling theory is the simplest. Hennard was a man who warned the world again and again that he hated people, that he wanted them dead, and no one took him seriously enough until it was too late.
In the years since the LUBY'S Massacre, it has been remembered as both a local and national tragedy. The Killeen in LUBY'S never reopened. The building eventually became a Chinese buffet. The chain itself went on, battered by financial struggles in later years, but not ended by the massacre itself. For the families of the 23 who were killed and the dozens wounded, the scars never healed. Every October in Killeen, the massacre is remembered as a turning point in how communities think about safety in public spaces. Nationally, the massacre shaped debates on gun laws, particularly in Texas. Suzanna Hupp's testimony before Congress describing how she could have stopped the killer if she'd been allowed to carry her handgun inside became a rallying cry for concealed carry advocates. To this day, her words are cited in legislative debates. But beyond politics, the legacy of LUBY'S and the massacre there is a lesson in fragility. A lunch hour, a cafeteria, a truck, and suddenly a normal day became the deadliest shooting in American history at that time. Now, when we talk about justice, prevention, and safety, it's easy to forget that the heart of the story is always the people who lost their lives. Patricia Carney, Michael Griffin, Aline Bush, Thomas Simmons, and so many others. Ordinary Texans caught in the crossfire of one man's hatred. The LUBY'S Massacre reminds us that normal is fragile, and that sometimes the cracks are visible long before the glass actually breaks. And as always, I'm Doug Duncan, reminding you that once you enter the dark, you may never be the same.